Thank you all and welcome everyone. I'm so glad that you're joining us for our very first iNaturalist webinar, the Year in Review Deep Dive. My name is Carrie Seltzer. I am the head of engagement for iNaturalist, and I'm so pleased to be joined by Scott Laurie, iNaturalist executive director, as well as Kat Chang, who is a board member and a very active member of the iNaturalist community. Behind the scenes, we have my colleague Tony Owani, who's going to help answer questions, and Walker Irving from Brass Ring Communications, who's helping us with all of the Zoom logistics. So over the course of the next hour, we'll do a deep dive into the year in review, reflect on what 2023 has meant for iNaturalist, both at the global level and see how you can explore that at a personal level too. We'll answer a few of your questions and share more ways that you can get involved with iNaturalist. But before we dive into the year in review, I want to start by putting this moment in context for biodiversity. 1 in 3 species are threatened with extinction this century, according to recent reports, and people are more disconnected from nature than ever before. And these are big challenges for humanity because people need biodiversity. We need it for food, water, shelter, so many things. So what iNaturalist seeks to do is to meet this moment in 2 complementary ways. 1 is through connecting people to nature, and 2 is through advancing biodiversity science and conservation. And these 2 parts of our mission really work together. Our strategy for achieving this mission is by creating technology, scalable technology, that lets us do both of those things. Which brings us to the iNaturalist platform. iNaturalist operates a free website that is translated into dozens of languages, as well as the free iNaturalist app and the free app Seek by iNaturalist. So these 2 the iNaturalist platform overall is how we are connecting people to nature and really scaling biodiversity science in new ways. A lot of people have asked about the difference between iNaturalist and Seek, so I just want to briefly give an overview of their similarities and differences. They both help you record and share, they both help you record and learn about biodiversity. But Seek is really focused on being kid safe and privacy conscious, which means that it's a very individual focused app. It's standalone. The suggestions that you get in Seek are made possible through the synthesized knowledge of the iNaturalist community. But you don't need to share anything with Seek. I do want to point out for the Seek enthusiasts in the audience, you should be sure to check out your year in review. Your Seek year in review for Seek is available only on your device, and it's only available in the month of December. So make sure you don't miss that. Seek is connecting millions of people to nature. At its peak month this year, almost 1 million people were using Seek. And this is one of the ways that we're helping people explore and learn more about biodiversity. But for the rest of the hour, we're really going to be focused more on the iNaturalist side of things, where people are not only noticing and learning about biodiversity, but are really actively generating this incredible resource. This is a snapshot of just 1 hour of activity on iNaturalist. And every orange dot represents an observation that someone shared in that hour, and every white line is connecting that observation to the general location of the person who added an identification. Because unlike Seek, which is standalone, iNaturalist is really focused on generating and sharing data about biodiversity as well. And so through this process, the community is really able to generate new insights for biodiversity at unprecedented scales. Just in this hour, we expect about 5,000 new observations to be posted, about 12,000 new identifications, and about 200 new accounts to be created. So with this context in mind, I want to turn things over now to Scott Laurie, who's going to help us walk through the global year in review and talk about what this means for iNaturalist. Welcome, Scott.
Thanks so much, Carrie. It's so exciting to be here with you and Kat and everybody else who's joining us, and just to celebrate 2023, which I'm definitely not exaggerating to say that 2023 is a very, very special year for iNaturalist. So number one, we spun off as an independent 501c3 nonprofit, which is really exciting. Number two, we're so excited to announce a major gift from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, which is really setting us up for success this year. And, as we'll dive into these stats, this was the biggest year that we've ever had in iNaturalist. So starting with the circle on the left, this is the first year that we ever passed 40 million observations in a single year. Over half of those, this green part here, are what we call research grade observations. So this is the subset of observations that have been peer-reviewed, corroborated by the iNaturalist community that we send to the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, GBIF. And GBIF is a hub. It's really the core of our global biodiversity infrastructure. And it ingests data from thousands of different publishers like iNaturalist from around the world. But if you go to GBIF right now, more than half of the non-bird data that was generated for 2023 came from iNaturalist, and more than 75% of the photographs. So one of the things that's really, really unique about what the iNat community is able to do is just the scale of the data that we're generating and getting into our biodiversity infrastructure. But it's not just the scale of this data, it's also the diversity of this data. The second graph sets this up by colors, and you can see, iNaturalist generates a lot of bird and vertebrate data, but we're also generating data on fungi, plants, and insects. And those are the groups, plants and insects, where most of the species are. And I mean, this is kind of amazing to me. This year, the iNaturalist community was able to census almost 300,000 species. And to put that in perspective, that's about 1 in 6 of all named species in the world was tallied, which is pretty crazy. And this is, I'm not exaggerating, there's never been an effort like this in the world that's been able to census hundreds of thousands of species on an annual basis like this. And I think that's a testament to the diversity and breadth, the global breadth of the iNaturalist community. And it really is unique. Right now, most data on most species in GBIF is generated by iNaturalist.
Scott, can you scroll down just a little bit so that we can see more of the key? Thanks. A little bit more, because of the zoom takes out a little slice. Great, thanks.
Yeah, so that's the different categories. But that's what, creates this big species count, is this coming together of observers, people producing these 40 million observations, and this community of identifiers who are identifying this. And you can see this next wheel, that identifier community is produced 56 million identifications this year, which is more than enough for every one of the 40 million observations. So talking about that community of 1 million people, you can see here that the vast majority are these observers, this group that went out and produced this 40 million observations. But there's this much smaller but really significant community of identifiers, people who are also adding identifiers to other people's observations. And that's a really important piece of the puzzle too.
So Scott, before you move on, I just want to, it might be blocked. Scroll just back up a little bit to that last circle. Over 1 million people this year shared observations on iNaturalist or added identifications, or did both. So we have a quick poll for you, because we're interested to know, the audience that's here live right now, how were you involved this year? So while that poll comes up, how did you use iNaturalist this year? Did you post observations? Did you make identifications? Did you do both? Did you do neither, or something else? So while you're answering that poll, Scott's going to go ahead and we'll come back to the results of this in just a minute.
Yeah, and next thing I want to talk about here, this is sort of the seasonality of these observations. So there's really 3 interesting patterns here. First is this summer hump. So this is the northern hemisphere summer, where more people are outside in North America and Europe when iNaturalist is most active. The second, all these squiggles are weekends, which is kind of interesting. So most people are outside at weekends, which kind of makes sense. And then this big peak here, this is something called the City Nature Challenge, which is an annual event where hundreds of cities around the world participate in a friendly competition by setting up bioblitzes of cities around the world, which is always the biggest weekend at iNaturalist, and a really exciting event.
Before you jump into these awesome, most faved photos of the year, can we see the results of the poll? And since it won't come through on the recording, I'll just explain the results here. So 51% of the people attending posted observations, 55% of you did both, 12% of you made identifications, 1% did neither, and 5% did something else. So thank you all. It's good to know a little bit more about the live audience we have watching this.
It's kind of interesting. It's an identifier skewed audience, which is cool. Well, that's great because that's one of the things we really, really want to emphasize in this is the importance of this the diversity of this community and people doing all parts of this puzzle to make all this happen. And a lot of those graphs we were looking at is about the big picture and with all this data coming together. But it's important to remember that each one of these observations is an individual encounter that someone had, a very personal encounter with a species, with nature. And these are the most commented and faved observations from the year. And what's cool about them is it shows the diversity of things people get excited about nature. So I mean, some of these things are just incredible, beautiful photographs like this mushroom. And I mean, that's obviously wildlife photography is a passion that a lot of people on iNaturalist share. Some of these are just sort of crazy, funny things like this. I guess this is a squirrel colliding with a rabbit. But a lot of these are popular because they're observations that are so unusual and significant that they really represent noteworthy and significant discoveries. And in many cases, they themselves, just a single observation has warranted a whole publication. And one example of this is this mantis here. So this was a mantis that Glenda Walter in Australia posted, and it was noticed by an entomologist named Matthew Connors, and they started working together on iNaturalist and said, hey, this is really unusual. This is a new species of mantis. And they worked together on the platform to describe it. But what we're so proud of and honored by is they named it iNat, which abbreviates to iNat. And they said in the paper, this is a tribute to a new way of doing natural sciences, of really bringing together these diverse communities on the platform to make these discoveries. And so I mean, that's just a great example of new species discovery, but all sorts of different interesting discoveries are happening. There's a ton of information contained in these photos in terms of species interactions. Like this is kind of crazy, this spider eating a crab. I didn't know that happened, but different phenology patterns, different morphologies, all sorts of information that scientists' behaviors are taking out of these photos. And many of those result in interesting publications. This one, sort of Sasquatch photo here, this is a mountain lion near Toronto in Canada, Eastern Canada, which is just so unexpected, out of range place for mountain lion to occur. And we're seeing species moving into weird places more and more with climate change forcing species into new habitats. A lot of these species are becoming invasive species showing up that all of a sudden explode and become agricultural pests. And iNaturalist is a really powerful tool for detecting these shifts in species that are happening. And a lot of those are so significant that they get written up as publications. Also on the conservation side, this cicada here, this is a cicada that only lives on a tiny little island south of Cuba. That's its entire global range, and it hadn't been seen since the 1930s. And many people think species like this are extinct. And it was rediscovered with this observation. So that, in terms of just tracking where these rare species are and making sure the conservation community has tabs on them is another really important part. But all of these discoveries I'm talking about have in common is this coming together of observers and identifiers. And this graph is just another way of seeing this workforce of identifiers, producing over 1 million observations, 1 million identifications a month. And it's interesting, a week. And it's interesting how steady it is composed to the seasonality of the observations. The next section I want to talk about is new species added. So remember, I said that we observed 300,000 different species this year, and we've observed total almost closer to 450,000. But when you look at this, if we could scroll all the way back to the early days of iNaturalist, like let's say back here. Oops. Actually having trouble doing that with the.
This is a great reminder that this whole year in review is interactive. And so I encourage everyone to check it out and click around on your own too after this webinar.
Yeah, that's a good point. You can kind of click on everything here, and a lot of times it will launch. Like if I click on this, it will launch into an iNaturalist observation. But I just went back here to April 2009, which is the very early days of iNaturalist. And You look at the species, these are the first time these species were observed. So here's acorn woodpecker, American robin, moose. I mean, these are species that now we're getting thousands of these every month. But this was the first time these species were logged on iNaturalist. And as iNaturalist grew, we started getting more and more species. But what's interesting about this pattern is it's kind of declining back down. And you look here, our current month, which is right here, and contrast that to things like, here we're still getting some vertebrates. But these are vertebrates like this snake is from the very small range in the middle of Africa. This bird is from the sort of harsh deserts of Central Asia where very few people go. But most of these are just overlooked species, things like sea slugs and liverworts and snails. And again, what's so special about the iNaturalist community is that we have this attention on this huge diversity of life, but that's what we're going to need to do if we're going to keep censusing more and more new species and getting enough data on the species to get them into the computer vision model and the geo model and things like that. Is we're going to have to get ways of getting people exploring these places that people don't go to, where some of these small range species occur, and paying attention to things like plants and insects and a lot of things that are overlooked. If you look at that graph, so these are a different way of seeing growth, and observations going up. There's a seasonality that we talked about with the year, but generally going up. But the new species is really sort of starting to flatten out, and that's because it's harder and harder to get these rare species unless we really, as the community, make an effort to go after them. But part of the growth that I wanted to look at, I think is kind of cool. So this is looking at growth by country. So this is the number of observations in 2022, last year. And so most of our observations came from, big countries with a lot of iNaturalist usage, like the United States, Canada, Russia, Australia, South Africa, some of the European countries. And you look at 2023 is quite similar pattern overall. But if we look at the 2023 over 2022, every country that's colored in here grew. So we didn't just have a biggest year total on naturals, but we had our biggest year for most countries. Pretty much every country except Mongolia, some of these African countries, some of these southern South American countries were bigger than 2022, which is pretty cool. This is just another way of seeing that white bar is last year and this green bar is this year. Our biggest year for species, our biggest year for observations, not our biggest year for new species, but that's because, as I was saying, it's harder and harder to find those. So I just want to talk about two more things. The last second to last thing I want to talk about was, we were talking in the most faved and commented observations about some of these observations that are so interesting that they're publications in their own right. But a lot of the studies that use iNaturalist data in 2023, they're using hundreds or thousands of different iNaturalist records. In many cases, they're using those data mixed up with other sources of biodiversity data, maybe through GBIF. And one thing that GBIF does is it tracks that for us. And according to GBIF, there were almost 800 publications that incorporated iNaturalist data into them. And this shows some of the most, some of the ones that were most popular, got the most attention. Like this is a Nature paper. It was a big biogeography study on evolution and the ranges of the evolution of annual and perennial plants. This one over here is on invasive species. I talked about how iNaturalist is a really important tool for tracking invasions. And then this one down here is kind of neat because it's talking about conservation priorities and how to prevent extinctions under the 30 by 30 biodiversity framework, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about. But if you want to, you can go to GBIF and look at all 800 of these publications. And that's just a subset of over 4,000 publications that have used iNaturalist data according to GBIF, over all time. But there have been over 800 from this year. Okay, well, the next thing I want to talk about is we talked a lot about how the thing that makes the iNaturalist work is this community of identifiers and observers posting content and working together. But it's not just generating data that is a really open science volunteer effort on iNaturalist. iNaturalist exists in 81 languages, and that's entirely due to a group of volunteer translators that we're highlighting right here. Thank you to all the translators who've done that. It's not just translating, it's also writing the code itself. So iNaturalist is an open source project, and over a dozen people have volunteered their time to help build the site itself, and we're featuring them here. And also funding the site. iNaturalist really depends on a huge important pillar of our sustainability is small dollar donations from the community. So, in terms of generating the data, building the site itself, and also supporting the site, this really is a community effort. And, you know, while it's a global community, iNaturalist has regional hubs. And this section is talking about the iNaturalist Network, which is a group of over 20 regional partnerships in different countries like Colombia and Israel, Ecuador, where and these partnerships really help us have a localized impact. And we've made separate year in reviews for each of these that you can click on and check out. Yeah, and in conclusion, I just want to end with thanking all of our supporters. So this is just a random subset of a handful of our supporters, but iNaturalist would not be possible without the donations of all of the people who are supporting it financially. So thank you so much. It's really what makes all this possible.
Yeah, thank you all. And Scott, if you scroll down just a little bit more, you'll see that there is a link at the bottom of the global year in review to view your personal 2023 year in review. You will need to be logged in or log into your iNaturalist account to do this. And we will put a link in chat that takes you to that directly. If you haven't already generated your year in review, we definitely encourage you to do that. And I'm so pleased to now introduce Kat Chang, who is going to share her year in review with us because she, as I mentioned, is a very active member of the iNaturalist community and has made so many observations and so many identifications for others that it would be inspiring for you to see her year in review. I know that it is inspiring for me. Welcome, Kat.
Hi, everybody. I'm super happy to be here. And it's incredible to me that I'm sharing with so many people. So thanks for joining us. I had a really great 2023. And if you are able to generate your own year in review, I'm sort of going to go through mine to help maybe decode it a little bit and also to share some of the clickable areas of it. So when you interface with it for the very first time, the thing that comes up is sort of a random collage of your observations throughout the year with your profile picture in front of it. And you can see there's me with my chickens. I'm actually an architect and urban designer and an amateur naturalist. So I primarily do this work on iNat, just helping contribute in any way I can on the weekends, as my stats will show. So moving down a little bit, you can see that summary of my personal interaction with both being out in nature and then posting it onto iNat. I made almost 5,000 observations, just a little shy of that. And out of that, you can see as I hover around on sort of how those were identified and sorted into different taxa and species that I'm particularly strong over in the plants area, but some of these other kingdoms also got my attention with insects and birds and some of the other vertebrates as well. But the stat that I'm most proud about is my identifications. I'm really close to 33,000. So hopefully by the end of the year, I will get there.
You're going to make it, Kat. I know you will.
Have my fingers crossed, right? And you can hover over those two and sort of see, which ones you're putting forward first, and then which ones that you're supporting earlier efforts to identification, which is what that is. And I'm happy to say I have very few mavericks. I try to clean those up. Like Scott had mentioned earlier, this verifiable observations by observation date, you can see that the blips that are going on really show that I mostly interact with my observations on the weekends, which kind of supports my weekly work week best. And the larger sort of green bars here really show that these are times I went out of town or on trips and really was looking closely at the nature around me in those areas. And then lastly, the gray bar is really showing the seasonality of my location in the Northern Hemisphere when I'm a little bit more active. And then the year in review takes a look at comparisons from this year to last year. And there's a lot of consistency here. you can see I took some other trips during different times of last summer. I had a little fewer of out outlays this year as compared to this year. And this next animation is super fun because it combines the observations with the geography that I happen to be at. And as it moves through the year down below here, you can see how the date bar is advancing. You can see, how I moved out into these forays. So everybody's year in review is going to be a little bit different. I tended to stay close to home in California, but I was lucky enough to go to Hawaii twice. And so this screen is zoomed out to capture that range. So someone who did further travel, their zoom is going to be way out, and people who stayed a little closer to home, the zoom will be a little bit closer. But one of the things that I really like about this is you can zoom in a little bit here, and let me kind of page up to my area that I'm based out of, which is the San Francisco Bay Area. And you can see how I'm moving out and beyond into the greater Bay Area a little bit more. The size of the circle is connected to the number of observations you made on that particular day. So you can see some days I just had a few, and other days were much, I was really going a deep dive looking into nature on those particular days.
The year in review is just such a great way to remember everything that you did, the places you went, the things you see. I love it.
Yeah, and I like reliving it. This is a cool thing. I don't know who came up with it, but I love it. So thank you. Most comments and faves. This is also really fun to kind of take a look back at your year and realize what of your observations generated the most interest within the community. And I don't have any crazy squirrels attacking rabbits, but it's really fun to kind of look at these. And some of these actually generated interest from academics and researchers saying, hey, in particular, this one, which I really loved because it's a beautiful moth that happens to be endemic to Hawaii. And I didn't know anything about this. Took the photo because, it was a beautiful organism. And I knew that it was a Cambridge moth because of the architecture of it. But Kyle Austin, who's this amazing lepidopterist out of UH Manoa, identified it as an endemic species, which totally surprised me because in Hawaii, so many of the wildlife that you see out there actually is invasive, and it's a very sad story, right? So this was a moment of, this is so cool. And somebody else came along and was able to identify 2 species for me. And the sad part to this is the other members of this genus are likely extinct. So I feel blessed to have been able to have an interaction with this particular animal. But I also go out and help survey for rare plants for my local Native Plant Society. And so some of these are showing connections to that, like looking for populations that have been seen in the past, but they're not sure, are they still extant? And so we use iNat as one of those platforms to help track for that. And then observation streaks, you can see that again, this is consistent with somebody who spends a lot of time working during the week and then really looking at things more on the weekends. But I believe there are other people there. When they look at this, it looks really different. Is that true, Carrie?
Yeah, so there are some people who have months long or even years long streaks on iNaturalist now. The record is more than 10 years. Maybe you're watching.
Congratulations. I think I know who
Yeah.
that is. That's amazing. Yeah. And then, this page to me is the first part of the year in review that I go down to at the end of every year when it's available, because I'm really curious about who helps me most. I'm really thankful to, I already shouted out to Kyle Austin, but also Kevin Facinda and a relatively new member of iNat, Ocean F, who has really been in there looking at what I've posted and helping make bridges between what's up there and what it potentially could be. And then, over time, I've gotten to know members of the community who post things that I'm able to help as well. And so I haven't yet met Wild Mare 64, but I have had a chance to communicate with Truth Seeker. And actually, Truth Seeker and I work together on identifying things together. And her knowledge base has grown so quickly over the time that we've interacted. And then Marav, who's an amazing participant in our area of iNat community, running so many BioBlitzes and connecting families and kids to nature. And so it's always a pleasure for me to help with any of her events that she's putting on.
Before you scroll too far, I just have to shout out that it's a little small at the bottom here, but it says Kat Chang helped 13,723 different people on iNaturalist year with those almost 33,000 IDs. And that is just incredible and inspiring. And thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I'm really hoping that those almost 14,000 people got some utility out of that interaction and stuck around. So, and you can also see here, these are, where I tend to focus on my ideas. And a little further in the Q&A, I'll talk a little bit about why I do have some up here, even though these are areas that aren't necessarily my strength. Plants are really my jam. And you can see that in that graphic representation right there. But then this is the coolest part in some ways right here. This tree of life or wheel of life, I'm not sure what to call it, but each one of these lines is indicating an observation of a type of species, and it's organized along the taxonomic sort of tree of life here. And it's showing that actually I looked at more things that weren't plants than plants, even though I just said plants are my jam. And that's, I think the beauty of iNat is sometimes it opens up all these other areas of curiosity and rabbit holes. Next year, 2024, I'm really going to try hard for the fish because they are such a tiny slice of the wheel right here. But this is clickable. So as you click into here, you can really kind of get in there and see, oh, in the squirrel area, I saw a lot of fox squirrels. And over here, one eastern gray squirrel, which is invasive in our area. But, here's the canid family over here. And then you can just keep zooming in here and looking at, what it was. And as you can rubber band as well. And to get out of this, you click in the middle. And so this is kind of starting to come out. This tool is really helpful to understand how things are related and how closely they are related versus how far apart they're related, as well as how many you actually saw. So pretty cool. And if I keep clicking out, eventually I am going to get to all of the phyla for all the things that I saw. So
just such a beautiful and fun way to explore. And we'll put a link in chat to Kat Chang's year in review so that you can explore hers.
Thanks. These are the newly added species for me. And I'm going to skip a little bit because I feel like I want to spend a little more time in Q&A, if that's all right. And then growth, I think Scott talked about this beautifully already. My newly added species is starting to crest off a little bit. I would have to move or do a lot more travel in order to get there. So, and then I had mentioned that I'm a pretty consistent observer from year to year. And this particular stat really sort of showcases that graphically, that I'm stuck in average right in there. Now, towards the end of the year, I will probably hit this regenerate stats to see if I made my 33rd thousand ID or if I went a little past that. And then, of course, you can share that if you're interested on your social media. And then lastly, you can move over to the Global Year in Review if you want to kind of bounce back and forth between yours and the overall site there. And I'm going to page back up to the top here and just sort of close out that one of the things that that I had been wrestling with a little bit is, I spend a lot of time identifying on the site, and I wasn't sure whether or not I wanted to be a monthly supporter because I spend, quite a few minutes every day, and sometimes it's an hour every day on the site helping, and I felt like that was a lot. And some people may feel that way, and I recognize that, it's fine. But I began to realize that actually the utility of iNat is huge for me. It's not just a place that I spend time helping other people, but my personal account, I can go back and look at my observations. I can take a look at where I was and what I had seen, all the way back to 2016 when I first joined. So I'm not maybe the oldest member of iNat, but over the years, it's become this deep repository of knowledge for me. And I love that I can review what, all of these amazing observations, and also the comments that people have done, made on them. So it's really important that iNat has a secure, sustainable future so that I can rely on all of this functionality that iNat holds for me. So I decided to become a monthly supporter. Honestly, it doesn't matter if all you have is $3, $30, or maybe you're super flush and have $300 a month to give. What really matters is that all of us come together to help create the foundation for a strong community of users. I want to see iNat continue to connect data to researchers, which was really apparent in my year in review, but also people to people, and most importantly, people to nature. So thanks, Carrie, for giving me this opportunity to share with everybody.
Thank you so much, Kat. We are just so grateful for all of the ways that you support and are just such a great friend to iNaturalist. Thank you. I want to acknowledge that you all have so many awesome questions. There are more than 1,000 people on this webinar live right now, and you submitted almost 1,000 questions in advance. So we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but we are going to be able to get to some of them. And to lead off, Scott, you touched on this in going through the year in review, but so many people asked this that I feel like it deserves its own special question. And that is, can you just tell us in a sort of focused way, how does iNaturalist have science and conservation impact?
Yeah, no, and I think one of the beauties of it is there's lots of different ways. I mean, when we talked about the publications through GBIF, I mean, a lot of scientists interact with iNaturalist through GBIF. So they're just saying, I'm doing a study on American pike and climate change. I'm going to get all the pike data available. And because iNaturalist, a huge part of our mission is open data, open science, making this data accessible to science and conservation, making that easy. A lot of pretty much, huge diversity of studies that are focused on the natural world end up using iNaturalist data. And many times those authors don't even really know that iNaturalist is part of their contribution. There's a whole nother group of studies that really focus on iNaturalist. And there's, iNaturalist is a unique data set. It has this social network behind it. A lot of these studies are actually, this one I loved is called Observing the Observers, talking about the social structure of iNaturalist and expertise in the community. A lot of them dive into the photos, but then a lot of those really are looking specifically at the data in the community in iNaturalist. But the subset that I like the most are the ones where there really is this iteration back and forth. We see this a lot with projects. One that I loved was this project that said, hey, we're a protected area, we're a park. We're getting a lot of newts that are being crushed on the road as they're crossing, because newts do this annual migration where they leave their holes and they go to water where they need to breed. We're getting all these newts crushed on the road. We should put an underpass in to help these newts do their migration. where should we do this? They set up a project on iNaturalist and they said, hey, community, let's start observing more new roadkill and figure out where we're going to put this underpass in. And so that's that whole conservation story from, using iNaturalist to design the question, rally the community to sort of change the behavior of their local community to observe this stuff in order to make change. And that can happen on a project level, like that nude example, but also in those individual observations that I mentioned, those discoveries. A lot of those are back and forth, like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. Please go back and find it again, or rear it out if it's a caterpillar, or, photograph the teeth. And it's that back and forth that I think makes iNaturalist just really not a data set. It's this interaction of people working together to make these discoveries.
That's so cool, Scott. And that's a great reminder that that it is this community effort and this sort of iterative process of identifications. And Kat, I'd really love to hear from you. What advice would you give to someone who's interested in getting started with making identifications for other people on iNaturalist? How should they get started?
So sometimes I run into people talking about how they don't have a lot of confidence in their own ability to, I'm going to say, properly identify things. And so my personal journey more was, I knew a little bit about plants, but maybe not the breadth of what I know now after my interaction with iNat. Um, my advice would be to get started with high level IDs and just interact on that sort of high level. Most people can figure out what a plant is from an animal. So even just, I often call those bucket IDs, that very high level, or a fungi from an insect. So just getting more connected to what you're seeing in your geographic area and offering that. And then don't be so worried if you're incorrect on a particular ID, because if you're wrong, that's okay. It's a moment for learning that, and it'll stick with you maybe even a little bit better if you're initially incorrect in it. So I would say just wade in, and then if you're not quite understanding exactly why someone offered a different ID, just ask them. Say, hey, what led you to this direction? Because I'm interested in learning. And there's a lot of knowledge sharing that comes from that. And I continue to learn in this way as well. So best of luck for people, starting to wade in on that. And people are more than welcome to tag me in things, but please keep in mind that my foundational base is coastal Northern California. If you're tagging me outside of that area, I may only be able to offer a high level assistance on that, but I'm happy to do that too.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. And I think it's worth mentioning as well that once you start adding identifications to other people's observations on iNaturalist, you're going to start getting more notifications, hopefully. And you'll probably want to be using the iNaturalist website to keep up on those so that, like Kat mentioned, if someone else comes along and has suggests that it's something else, you'll want to pay attention to that. Kat, sort of following on that, you know, iNat is so big now that it's almost, I think it can be really overwhelming, and the scale at which iNaturalist is operating these numbers of observations can be like kind of hard to comprehend. So I think it's natural to feel overwhelmed. If someone is feeling overwhelmed and they don't know where to start, what advice would you give for someone who's feeling that way?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, another thing that you can do, particularly if you're on the website, is you can look in the sort of down near the bottom, and it'll talk about other folks that have interacted with that taxa the most. You can reach out to those people and ask for their help. I think, just connecting and saying, hey, I think it's this thing, but I'm not totally sure. What do you think? And having that interaction, I think, will help with that.
Yeah, and I also like the idea of just trying to focus on one small place. It could be one park that's interesting to you. It could be your county, or even your country, especially in parts of the world that don't have as much iNaturalist activity. You can just check in on the observations in a place and see if you can help advance any of those identifications.
I think that's particularly helpful in areas that don't have a lot of iNaturalist users interacting. Just helping people with those high-level IDs really helps for continuity in those areas too. So lately, I've been going to different countries and just going through their unknowns, sorting them into plants, animals, fungi, whatever that might be.
Yeah, that's great and really valuable. I know sometimes initially people, if you post something to iNaturalist without any identification and someone comes along and adds an identification of just plant or bird, sometimes people get upset and they think like, duh, I know it's a plant. Why are you telling me it's a plant? Well, it's important so that the people who are looking for plant observations can find it. Every identification on iNaturalist is tied to that tree of life that Kat walked us through in her personal year in review. So Scott, you talked about iNat's role in global biodiversity monitoring and the scale, like the scale of data is so unprecedented and important. What other aspects of iNaturalist data are important? What else do you think about?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, you had a early slide about, that statistic, 1 in 3 species threatened with extinction this century, which is pretty crazy and mind-boggling. And I think, a lot of us are really starting to see that with the climate change that we're all experiencing. Everything's getting so hot, and we're seeing that impact now on species. And one of the things I'm really excited about is, can we build this global monitoring infrastructure that will provide the insights that policymakers and conservation managers need to try to reach some of these goals that we talk about all the time, like zero extinction, this 30 by 30 framework. But like, how are we really going to pull that off? What are we going to need? And like you mentioned, we're going to need scale. We're going to need lots and lots of data coming in to inform this policy. But it's not just that. This data has to be representative. It has to come from all different parts of the globe. How do we get people out monitoring like they're doing now in Europe and North America and some of these more remote parts of the globe? Has to be representative taxonomically, like we said. I mean, there's so much attention is on very small branch of the tree of life, like birds. How do we get attention on some of these overlooked insects and invertebrates and amphibians and reptiles and things like that? And also accuracy. And many of these trade off. We're really pushing to try to get more scale, but we have to make sure that the data is representative. We have to make sure that it's accurate. And that's one of the things we really worry about is as iNaturalist gets bigger and bigger, how do we ensure that the accuracy stays high when the community becomes more anonymous? People are relying more on these AI tools that are really helpful, but also can lead people astray. So that's certainly something to consider. But I think it's a balanced approach. With this infrastructure we need to build has to have that scale aspect of it. It has to have that representative aspect, but it also has to have that high accuracy. And balancing everything and growing that together is going to be a really tricky balancing act.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And reflecting back on those sort of more personal aspects of iNaturalist, Kat, I'm interested to hear you just briefly describe how iNaturalist has become part of your lifestyle over the last several years since you joined, and if you have advice for people who are newer and maybe interested in getting more involved with other people.
So first, I think your partner, if you have a partner, needs to find the iNat support group. Just kidding. But yeah, so one of the things when I first started posting to iNat, I was just by myself. I didn't really know anybody yet, but over time, I began to get invitations to bio blitzes or different walks that some of the native plant societies or some of the other societies that are interested in conservation in the Bay Area. And they would invite me to come and participate. And it was expected that iNaturalist was going to be one of the platforms in which data was going to be collected. And so going to those events was amazing because then I got to know different people. I got to know their handles and who they, who they were in real life. So I would say that over the last 8 years, I've actually made an incredible group of friends that I now go out together hiking and, gotten to understand who they are and, really share a lot of experiences with them. And I really treasure all those friendships, and I credit iNat for bringing that into my life. And I'm sure my husband feels similarly to some extent too.
Thanks, Kat. It's so inspiring to hear how it's become an important part of your life and really grown and enhanced your relationships. Scott, so many people asked this question. What's ahead for iNaturalist? What's in store for 2024?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this is a really exciting time, and I think I can say on behalf of the whole iNat team, we're definitely really excited about this next stage of the journey. I mean, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to do a new round of hiring, so starting in 2024. So please look for those announcements. We've got a pretty major new release of the mobile app that we're hoping 2024 at least to get a beta out. We'll see how that goes, but we're really excited about that. I mean, I think just big picture, in the early days of iNaturalist, we did a lot more kind of experimentation and innovation, really focusing on the product. And then as iNaturalist really started growing, and a lot of our attention was just shifted on how do we support this growth. And then in the last couple of years, we've really made a lot of investments in trying to support the organization to allow us to be successful in the future. And that's been big distraction in a lot of ways, things like spinning off this new organization. But I'm really excited about that setting us up now to kind of get back to focusing on the product and focusing on how can we really create a great experience for the iNaturalist community to, that everybody will love and will stay engaged. And I mean, that's something I really hope that we can do is get back to focusing on making iNaturalist awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. I know I'm really excited about what's in store for iNaturalist next year, and I hope that all of you are as well. I am going to share now this is a word cloud generated from the results of the question that we asked you at the very beginning. If you were here right at the very beginning, we said, how has iNaturalist inspired you this year? And nature comes out very clearly. Learn new plants. So many people maybe haven't paid attention to plants before they really start spending time with iNaturalist, but it turns out like plants are in general one of the easiest things to observe. I think we have a lot of folks who maybe come in as birders or come in as butterfly enthusiasts, and then they become so much more interested in plants and everything else, and I love it. So you all inspire us so much, and it's really great for us to see how iNaturalist has inspired you. I want to just share a few closing thoughts as we wrap up, because so many people ask this question, how can I get involved? So I hope that this whole presentation has given you a lot of ideas and inspiration. But if you're feeling overwhelmed, I want to leave you with 4 clear ways that you can get involved. One is by spreading the word. There's still so many people who love nature who don't know about iNaturalist or about Seek, and you are uniquely positioned to reach people in your community. And iNaturalist has overwhelmingly grown by word of mouth and through people and institutions who have adopted iNaturalist to fulfill personal goals that they have, as well as other organizational missions. And of course, you can share your year in review on social media or with your friends and family. So many ways to spread the word. Of course, you can also post observations. Wherever you are in the world, there are species that are unique to that place, and you're there, you can observe them. I can't. I'm in Washington, D.C. So making observations and sharing them with the iNaturalist community is the bread and butter of iNaturalist. And as we've also touched on, identifying. If you have never added identifications on iNaturalist, perhaps you're inspired to get started. Again, so many of you have been so generous with your time and your expertise and the community building that you do through sharing that on iNaturalist. And those of you who haven't started with that yet, remember that based on your interests and your experiences, there's something that you're uniquely suited to help with as well. And the fourth thing is that I want to invite you to be a donor to iNaturalist. Like Scott mentioned and like Kat mentioned, this is a community effort. We're a nonprofit and we rely on a broad base of support. I want to thank the more than 6,000 members of the community who have made donations so far in 2023, and more than 2,000 of them are monthly supporters. Thank you so much for your predictable generosity. It really helps us. It helps us be able to budget more easily in real practical terms. And we really want to thank the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation for their generous support. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that they are doubling one-time donations before December 31st and tripling recurring donations. And they've already matched more than or nearly $450,000. So thank you to the Moore Foundation and to everyone else who is financially supporting iNaturalist. But we dropped a link in chat, but if it's easier to scan a QR code, we will leave this up here as well to make it easy. But I just really want to reemphasize that that biodiversity needs you. Biodiversity needs all of us. And there are things that you are uniquely suited to do that no one else is. And I hope that you reflect on that, and whatever it is, I hope that you embrace it for the rest of the year and into 2024. So I want to thank you all for everything that you do for iNaturalist. Thank you for joining us for this hour, for your generosity, and I look forward to seeing you on iNaturalist.